How misinformation affects media. How do we contain and reduce the amount of misinformation in all forms of media?
How is this a problem? Misinformation is seen as a problem because no one is there to control it. The internet is something quick and easy to navigate. Anyone can post something online. The lack of fact checking makes everything spread a whole lot easier. And according to Forbes magazine, misinformation is seen as a problem because there is no one there to stop and fact check it. Fact checking every single website and source could quite literally take years because we have amassed so much information onto the internet. Who/what this affects. Misinformation affects everyone, but mostly the most vulnerable people in our society. An older person might get their news online from a very uncredible source and believe what they are saying because the language of the sources sounds academic and reliable. We often see this in our youth and elderly get misinformation from uncredible sources or unchecked sources. Our youth has been getting their sources mostly from Twitter and spreading it to other social media platforms. Now, people from other platforms hear about the news and don't check it. It bounces from person to person and no one bothers to look it up online and fact check it.
Using the research we had from academic journals, the scientific community as a whole, especially when it came to current events such as COVID-19, have been in shock with the amount of misinformation that's been circulating and the lack of action towards it. So from the study that I did find that was relatively credible, it produced this infographic, and it shows how they went from problem to problem and they had somewhat solutions to them. For example, the first one is it a continued influence effect, and then the solutions would be an alternative account to fill in whatever was missing, and then repeated retraction, which is a repetition of basically the fact. And this goes on with familiarity backfire effect, and then the overkill backfire, and then the worldview backfire effect. And then they also went more in depth with the who, what, where, and why. Another thing that was very interesting about this article is that it said that ignorance wasn't generally a factor that led people to become misinformed, because they already had biases that affirmed the myth to be true in their eyes.
For the credible sources, the first one was trends in the diffusion of misinformation on social media. So they spent some time measuring the trends of the content diffusion of misinformation that was seen on social media sites and how it was regulated. And they found that misinformation spiked and increased during times of major events. And they mentioned the 2016 election, but it can also be related to this past 2020 election, as well as all of the information about the COVID-19 pandemic. And then the second credible source is, can science literacy help individuals identify misinformation in everyday life? And they came to the conclusion that the components that are most likely to help individuals identify misinformation in everyday life are understanding the scientific practices. So it can be applied to just understanding of the knowledge that they're trying to seek in general, and identifying and judging appropriate expertise, and as well as dispositions and habits of mind.
So some ASU resources that I found and used could be the psychology department and the communications department. So the link that I provided is a lab that it doesn't help with misinformation in media, but it does help us grasp a bigger understanding about human behavior and how we perceive things and how our cognitive state perceives the things that happen. So we can get a better understanding of how we think the way we do. And the communications department did a lab or a study on media and sports. So they had a lot of resources about different media topics they covered and how different each one was covered. We could analyze that type of academic vocabulary with the information we see online to see how the resource that I provided is credible, but they use the same vocabulary. leading you to misunderstand the sources that we see.
These two links will bring you to the interviews we used for today and for finding out more about this topic. The interesting parts about these interviews is that both explain that misinformation is not a new concept that arose earlier this decade, but in fact it's been around ever since information has been created. But it seems this way only because of the fact that we have so much more information and so much more of it is accessible to the random person, and any random person can post anything anywhere and it can be information. One of the presentators did specify how that bots do spread misinformation, but in their wake, they also spread the truth as people try to correct the bots and just create countering bots that do the same thing but spread the truth instead. And the same presenter also talked about their solutions, and we wanted to describe them now and then go into them deeper later, which was labeling, incentives for the truth in media, and regulation of companies. And then the other presenter was mostly individually focused, as they wanted their solutions to be that we challenge our opinions and we try to listen to others while not being nasty to others.
So overall, working to solve this issue, as mentioned in the interviews, labeling is just giving warnings of fake news stories once they're flagged. And incentives for the truth are just trying to turn away from like clickbaiting and using like over the top or just misleading titles for articles. And regulation is just when large social media corporations monitor and flag misinformation and delete it. And we came to the conclusion that there's no one like clear path of a solution for misinformation. Rather, it needs to be a combination of efforts by not only social media corporations, but also like people consuming it, of efforts to decrease its severity.
These are our citations that we used for this presentation.